Officially our last day here of the SAIS Walls to Fall project. We're very happy everybody could make it. We have some distinguished guests here today to join us. This has been a very exciting week. It's the 9th of November today. 20 years ago the Berlin Wall came down peacefully, and we would like to commemorate that, but we also like to look ahead. The idea of this project is walls to fall. Which walls still have to fall in this world? There is still a lot to be done out there, and this event was there to bring the SAIS community together, discuss what still needs to be done. There are physical walls that exist in this world. There are walls of the mind that keep people from saying what they want to say, or doing what they want to do, writing what they want to write, praying to who they want to pray. So we've addressed a couple of these issues here, and we hope that this discussion will go on. And so this 9th of November 1989 keeps its relevance, and we'll remember it not just as a day in the past, but as a reminder of what needs to be done in the future. So thank you all for joining us. And now I'd like to turn it over to Dan Hamilton, who's the director of the Center for Transatlantic Relations, who's been very helpful for getting this all together. So maybe we can all give a big hand to Dan. Thank you.
Thank you. Actually, the students deserve really the credit here. It was their idea. It's a great initiative, and as I say, it's forward-looking. Particularly on this day, it's a time to think for a moment about that day 20 years ago, but it's also a day to look ahead. I actually lived in Berlin in the 1980s. I was in Berlin on the 9th of November. You always have to think, where were you in a day? I was actually in East Berlin at the first part of the day, talking to a dissident pastor, Rainer Eppelmann, who was the pastor of the Samaritan Church in East Berlin, which was a safe haven for many of the dissidents at the time. I was in his apartment, which was bugged by the Stasi, and we had to go hide in a sort of a broom closet for him to tell me what he thought was happening. And then I moved across back to West Berlin, where I was at the Aspen Institute. We actually had a reception that night, 7 o'clock that night, where a lot of the prominenti, as we would say, from East and West Berlin were gathered, knowing that nothing was going to happen that night, including the mayor of West Berlin. And I found myself talking to Wolfgang Vogel, who was a spy trader for the East Germans, moving people back and forth across the wall. At that time, I asked him right at 7 o'clock, I said, what will happen? And he said, the Communist Party has lost control. It's going to be very dramatic over the next few days. And he actually got a ride back across to the east at 7 from the American DCM, the #2 at the U.S. Embassy in East Berlin. He said, you want to ride home? And so the American diplomat and the East German spy trader found out about the wall coming down in the car as they went back. It shows you that really no one had really anticipated that. But I think if you think about this, I think it's more important to think about the walls that are still to fall and in this world, because this was only one. And it's because of lots of other things that were happening at that time, not just in Germany, but beyond. And we're delighted to have a number of diplomats here representing countries that really participated in this with us here to join the students in this event. When I thought about this wall, it was also about opening up Europe to try to extend to most of the continent what had been enjoyed by half a continent. I also found myself actually in Independence, Missouri some years ago with Madeleine Albright as she gave the instruments of accession to the Poles, the Czechs, and the Hungarians at NATO. Another important day for me personally, but in a day that I think is in sequence of what has happened here. During that, when that wall was there, my last point, no one thought it would go away. The Chancellor today, Chancellor Merkel, said she never thought it would happen in her lifetime. And she lived in the eastern part of that wall. And if we're honest, 2 generations of leaders grew up thinking and building their careers on the premise that that wall would never go away. And suddenly, peacefully, unexpectedly, it was gone. And we had a generation of leaders superbly trained to deal with a world that no longer existed. So I think for the students here, never base your career on that premise, that walls will not go down. Base it on the fact that change will always be with us, and keep those options open. So what I'd like to do is welcome the guests that we have here from Central and Eastern Europe. Zoltán Gábor is the Deputy Chief of Mission from the Hungarian Embassy, Andrej Droba, the Deputy Chief of Mission from the Slovakian Embassy, Wojciech Flera, the Deputy Chief of Mission from the Polish Embassy, Vilma Anežová, who's the head of the Cultural Section of the Czech Embassy, and Christoph Eichhorn, who I worked with in different occasions, who is the political minister, the head of the political section for the German Embassy. And I can't think of a better person to join us right now to talk about this. Christoph.
Daniel. Nicholas, thank you very much for this very kind introduction and for the invitation to all of us here. This is a wonderful occasion to be able to stand here together with you all and try and develop the same feeling hundreds of thousands of people, including heads of state and government from all over the world, have at the moment as we speak, celebrating this anniversary in Berlin. I'm sure that in the course of the day you might want to rush to your laptops and go on all these wonderful websites where you can watch the live videos there from Berlin. I thought for a moment where I was. I served at the West German Embassy in Moscow at the time, and of course there was an East German Embassy also. And the East German Embassy for the GDR had an enormous significance, as you might imagine. And it was much larger than the West German Embassy, but the fun at the West German Embassy that day was much larger. And we were all watching TV pictures from Berlin on the only TV and on the only link we had, because of course at the time the Soviet Union was jamming all these media signals, both TV and radio, from the West, so we had just one line where we could watch the pictures from Berlin. And I remember standing there with my wife and colleagues and so forth, and we were sort of literally pinching each other's arm because we wouldn't believe what we were seeing at the time, 20 years ago. I think there are two lines which very much stick, at least in my mind, of that day. One line is today, that's 20 years ago, today the Germans are the happiest people on the earth. That was a famous quote by the then mayor of Berlin, who was here in Washington last week at an occasion at the museum. And this is certainly true, and we try and keep this feeling as much as we can. The other famous line refers not only to Germany, but to all our neighbors, and certainly to the nations represented here by my colleagues today. And that is the famous line by Willy Brandt when he said, "Now grows together what belongs together." And he didn't only speak about the two Germanys, but he spoke about Europe without walls, freedom without walls, Europe whole and free. This event and this jubilee is not only about Germany or the Germans, it's just as much about the Poles and the Czechs and the Slovaks and the Hungarians and the Baltic nations and the Russians, who were holding their breath, at least some of them, whether Gorbachev would succeed with what he was setting out there to do. So this is a jubilee for all of us in Europe, which we are happy to celebrate together, and it is certainly an occasion to celebrate for America, because I think if you're looking through the foreign policy of this country or through the achievements of the transatlantic alliance over these decades, this was probably the greatest victory for the United States and for the Western Alliance without a single shot fired. And I think this should be underlined here today. So again, thank you very much. It's a wonderful occasion, and let's lock the damn thing down.